So, welcome back to our lectures on the Exalted Treatise on the response of the Tao. And the passages we'll cover today are going to be the following three: dare to be cruel or destructive, secretly undermine the good and the kind, surreptitiously humiliate leaders and parents. Those are the three passages. We sort of finished on regard oneself capable when committing wrong last time. So we'll start with daring to be cruel or insensitive or destructive, basically being insensitive. And if you can keep that sentence in mind, basically being the complete opposite of a compassionate person. A compassionate person is a person that feels sorry to see other people suffering from any sort of misfortune or danger, and they'll try to protect life in all its forms. So the complete opposite of that is obviously being reckless, not caring at all about someone's pain and injury or the damage that is being caused to their property. Or there might be that they haven't even turned their mind to the fact that someone might suffer detriment or harm. So they're completely oblivious. And you could say maybe in some ways negligent. They sort of should care, but they haven't even thought about it. So they haven't even considered that someone might get hurt or they might cause damage to someone's property from whatever they're doing. Now, you might be wondering, why would anyone be cruel and destructive? It sounds completely unreasonable and insensitive. Why would people do that? It's clearly a misdeed, right? Well, perhaps there might be these four reasons, and maybe you can think of other reasons. But perhaps a person might be in a hurry, they're rushing, and so they can be careless when they're in a hurry. This might be, when they're trying to clean the house, using the vacuum cleaner. Doesn't matter what sorts of things gets sucked up into the vacuum. Could be smaller insects that they haven't cleared away beforehand. It could be when they're driving in the car, they're just focused on getting from A to B. They're running late. It doesn't matter that they're putting other passengers or other road users in danger from their speeding. So that's the sort of attitude, and that sort of thinking is already a misdeed in itself. Another reason might be the sort of attitude where you think it's out of sight, it's out of mind. You could, for example, a person might throw things out in the rubbish, and who cares? It's picked up every week, goes to landfill, and it's not their problem anymore, is it? They don't care whether the things that they throw out could be reused or repurposed or recycled. And it's quite interesting that these days you can actually recycle hair dryers or office supplies, stationery, all sorts of things can be recycled if you have the heart to do a little bit of research. Even really, really worn out clothes that you couldn't take to be sold at a secondhand charity shop, they can also be recycled. But just tossing it out without another thought, that is could well be another reason for being insensitive to cruelty and destruction. Another reason is just being uninformed. These days, many people don't have the opportunity to be educated about kindness, how to cultivate good deeds to enjoy good fortune. Good fortune does not come, it's not based on buying a lottery ticket. it has nothing to do with that sort of activity at all. But many people don't know that. And so they feel that they just don't realize the harmful effects that can come about by their own misdeeds. So it's not that they don't care, but they don't even know to care. And finally, the person might be praised or paid or rewarded in some way for actions that may be directly or indirectly harmful and toxic to the rest of the community. And it could be in the Exalted Treatise, the collected commentaries on the Exalted Treatise sort of alerts us to sort of think again about the choices we make in our day-to-day living. It could be the food that we eat, what we do for a living, and how we spend our time, even our recreation, what we do for that. Does that lead to cruel and destructive consequences? And an example of where someone might be earning a very lucrative amount of money from, they could be working as part of the casino industry, for example. It sounds like fun and games, but that can be very toxic to any community with that sort of that gambling industry. So these are just 4 possible reasons why a person would bear to be cruel and destructive. I'm going to share with you a few historical accounts, and these are stories. I'll just quickly share. These are stories from what's known as the Collectania of the Way and its virtue. Let's share my screen again. There are 3 that comes from volume 7 of this set of books. And volume 7 relates to sort of all the different people from all walks of life within the community. So as you can see here, there's a salt merchant, a maidservant, a doctor. There are 3 accounts from volume 7. And another account in relation to a county magistrate, a government official. So I'm going to talk about these 4 stories that sort of help us think a little bit more about this particular passage bearing to be cruel and destructive. So I'll stop presenting the screen. Okay, and you can just listen to the stories. The first story is about the salt merchant, and his name was Zhang Zhenyuan. And he would be based on a boat by the side of the river. One time, there was a huge flood, and it completely devastated the community. And he noticed a woman crying out for help. This woman was clutching onto a bundle of clothes with one hand and hanging on to the kitchen cupboards with another. And so what Mr. Zhang does is he takes out a small boat and goes to try to rescue this woman. So he rescues the woman and gets close enough to that particular part of the flooded waters, and he notices inside the kitchen cupboards is nothing but silk and gold pieces. And in that moment of greed, he pushes the woman back into the water and presumably takes her valuable possessions for himself. Now, the next line of the story tells us that 4 years later, Mr. Zhang and all of his family, his family 10 altogether, I think their home is swept away by a sudden flash flood, and all 10 of them drown, they die from drowning. Now, you're probably thinking, gosh, that's such a terrible consequence that you wouldn't wish on anyone. For his whole family to suffer like that and to die in such circumstances. But if we reflect a little bit on, what Mr. Zhang did, he, I don't know, did say that he took out a small boat. So I'm not sure whether it was a matter of, everything not being able to fit on his boat, but he clearly chose to profit or a material gain over saving someone's life. And that was already a misdeed in itself. It then goes on to, profit from this poor woman's valuable possessions. His family probably benefited from this windfall from someone in crisis. And as a result, everyone in that family suffered. So you can clearly see it didn't happen immediately, but he sort of got his comeuppance about 4 years later. He thought he could get away with it. It was tons of flood. It wasn't as if the police was looking over his shoulder, but he basically, you could say, murdered someone and took their property, all of their valuable possessions. That's absolutely terrible. And you're probably thinking, that certainly doesn't happen these days, or, that's completely rather extreme and unreasonable. Let's have a look. There's another story, and this is about that county magistrate of a particular area called Weinan. And it's during the 8th century. The year is 767. And that year, during the autumn, there was a severe frost that basically damaged all of the crops, across the nation. Now, one particular official, everyone reported that all the crops, all of the government officials in the different areas and districts reported that all the crops that people had cultivated, farmed, were damaged. So there could be a famine. And, obviously this was a great concern for the central government, because they would have to make sure that grain was distributed, all sorts of relief and aid and things like that. But strangely, there was one official, Liu Zhao, and he was the only official to report that his area, the area of Weinan, was unaffected. He said that the crops were completely unaffected. Now, the emperor, the Tang Emperor Daizong, had some doubts. He was the only official who reported that crops in his region were unaffected. And so he was concerned enough and worried enough to send another official by the name of Zhu Yi to double check, just to investigate and verify that the crops were actually okay. And, as soon as Zhu Yi got to Weinan, it was quite clear that the crops were not okay. In fact, over 20,000 hectares were damaged. So this had real consequences for all of the communities in those regions. And, by not reporting, it meant that, it amounted to a cover-up. And basically all the people in that region, had the emperor believed the initial report, would have missed out on relief and grain, and that was much needed in times of such disasters. So the end result for this Liu Zhao was that he was immediately demoted to a much lower role, and he actually died on the way to that role. Maybe that was not an accident. His one decision, we don't know why he made that decision. not, to completely falsify the report that none of the crops in his region was impacted. But the emperor actually made the point. He commented when the Zhui came back and reported on what really was the case. The emperor sort of was quite disappointed and said, "Oh, government officials, they're meant to be looking after and caring about the welfare of the local population. And by being unresponsible in such reporting, it just shows blatant disregard. So as a government official, a very fundamental duty is to look out for the needs of the people that you're supposed to be responsible for. And when you act like Liu Zhao did, you're basically flouting all of your obligations. And so, he got his comeuppance and being demoted. But his one decision had the potential to, people could have died for starvation, crops failing, no government grain relief, etc. Thousands of people could have died. And fortunately, they didn't. But his decision could have had such terrible consequences, and he suffered an untimely death himself on the way to this demoted role. So that's another historical account. That one decision could have brought suffering to so many people. And that's another case of being completely insensitive to cruelty and destructive consequences. Now there's another case, and this relates to a woman this time. Her name was Yang A-Zi. And the occult Tanya records that on her deathbed, she was very old by this particular time, these were her last words. She lived a life of hardship and suffering ever since she was a young child. And so she has this to say in her final moments. She said, "I used to be a doctor in a former lifetime, and I failed to be careful in examining my patients. A lady patient came to me, and she claimed to be suffering from an intestinal parasite, what we might call worms. I didn't realize at the time, I failed to check properly, that she was actually pregnant. And so what I did was I prescribed some strong medication to terminate the worms. And this woman was obviously, quite concerned about her condition. She immediately took the medication, and she ended up dying along with twins in her womb. So this one careless mistake costed 3 lives. And as a result, I have been reborn for 3 lifetimes now. This is the end of my 3rd lifetime as a menial maidservant, a very lowly maid. And I've suffered a lifetime of poverty, or lifetimes of poverty and hardship, suffering cold and hunger and illness and disease. And I hope that my experience through my words can help and serve as a caution to doctors, other doctors now." And she sort of offers these words as a cautionary lesson for others. Just one careless mistake, misdiagnosis, and it caused her to suffer over 3 lifetimes like that. Probably thinking, is that, a bit harsh? Maybe she didn't mean to misdiagnose. Might have been in a rush, lots of patients to see. But I guess as a doctor, you have a professional duty and you're in a position of trust to look after your patients, to act in their best interests. Because as the doctor, you have a lot of knowledge. You know more about their particular illness or medical condition than most patients that you see. And so the patient has to trust that whatever you prescribe and how you diagnose their condition is correct, is accurate, and you're acting in their best interests. So you're in a position of trust as a doctor. And when you abuse that trust by failing to fulfill your professional duties to your patients, then that is a worse misdeed, because your job is to care and look after, these patients. They're not just any other, other human being. Human beings are generally meant to look after each other as friends, as family members, but as a doctor, you have that extra obligation from the medical point of view to make sure that they receive the right treatment for their condition and the right diagnosis as well. So this particular account reminds us that there are real life consequences to all of our decisions. Even our negligent mistakes have consequences. So that's the story about young Ah Tzu. Now, there's another account in relation to another doctor. This time it's Dr. Xu, and he is treating a wealthy patient by the name of Jiang Shunming. Now, his wealthy patient is suffering from a wound on his back, and it's agreed that he will pay his doctor 300 gold pieces. Now, 300 gold pieces sounds very expensive, even in today's terms. It's probably an extortionate amount of money. Well, 10 days into the treatment, the doctor decides that he wants to be paid more. And so he seeks for more money. So if that isn't extortion, I'm not sure what is. But as you can imagine, the patient refuses. The son gets upset and angry and refuses to pay more. And so there's a long and drawn out argument. The doctor actually twists some of the papers used for medicated papers or some sort of papers and sticks it into the open wound on his patient's back, causing the patient to cry out in agony. And all the while they're, arguing over the bill, the medical fees. And the doctor tells the patient, this wealthy patient, look, pay me and I'll make the pain go away. So that sounds like blackmail, doesn't it? In the most vulnerable moment for this poor patient. Well, after a long protracted argument, the son agrees to pay half of what the doctor was demanding at the particular time. And by that time, this twisted piece of paper that was stuck into the wound had sunk in about an inch deep. And when the doctor came to pull it out, all this blood came gushing out, and the patient effectively bled to death. So this wealthy patient passed away. You can imagine how upset the whole family would be and outraged. And the patient's son sued the doctor. The doctor was found guilty and sentenced to serious punishment. It might even be death, the death penalty. But just before this, he is to suffer the particular punishment. He manages to bribe his way out. So up until now, you're thinking, well, the doctor, got a lot of money, and he's even, gotten away with from suffering the consequences of this particular court sentence. Well, not long after that, the doctor himself falls very ill. And this condition, whatever it is, leaves him crying out in pain for days. And, outside of his room, people have heard him, shout out, "Don't hit me. Jiang Shunming, don't hit me. I've done nothing wrong. And your son has gotten it all wrong." And he would say this, and it would be heard for days, crying out in pain until he ultimately passed away. So, the commentaries on this particular story makes 2 points. The first is that, when doctors fail to perform their professional duty and misdiagnose or, other forms of negligence, they're causing harm and suffering to their patients. That's already a misdeed, right? But when the doctor is seeking to profit from the patient's pain and misery and intentionally inflicting injury, making their conditions worse, making their pain all the more worse, that sort of intentional, deliberate harm, that's an even worse misdeed. So again, we see that it's another abuse of the position of trust that a professional doctor or other professionals often have, because they have more knowledge than the person that they're looking after in their care. So, and charging extortionate sums for medical treatment. 300 gold pieces was already a very expensive fee. And then sort of 10 days into the treatment, asking for more, that was just completely unreasonable. And so you can understand why that doctor suffered that sort of comeuppance. Okay, a completely different set of circumstances. It's another doctor. This time it's an old doctor, Dr. Wang, and he's from Jingrang County. And this is the doctor who goes out of his way to treat his patients, and he treats the poor patients for free. And even in the heat of summer, he would walk and travel to go and check up and review their conditions, make sure if anything needs to be adjusted in their treatment program, and he would do this numerous times, even in the heat of summer, and treating people who couldn't afford to pay for medical treatment, treating them for free. So not only did he care about his patients, but he went sort of over and above being charitable as well. And it said that, he would only give his patients the medications that were prepared to the highest standards. So he was completely responsible in every way. So what happened to him? Well, he lived well into his 80s. And he lived to see his great-grandson get married. So obviously had a very long and healthy life. His family prospered in terms of the number of descendants, and many of his descendants rose to prominent positions within the community. Maybe they served as government officials, but basically the family prospered. So it's completely different. Here is someone who cares, and who's cultivating good deeds in each and every one of his patients. And as a result, it's no coincidence that he enjoys such good fortune, having a long life. His whole family benefits, not just him as well. So there's a huge contrast, and reminds us that, this is what's the right and wrong things to do. Okay, now the next passage, just get back to sharing my slides. Next passage is about secretly undermining the good and kind. Secretly undermining. Undermining refers to sort of underhand tactics. And being secret means doing things that no one sees, no one hears about. As a result, no one knows that a particular person has done something. And this is in relation to, undermining people who are trying to be good and kind to others. So if you sort of bear that in mind, I'll just stop sharing. Now, underhanded tactics might be, stabbing someone in their back, talking about them behind their back, spreading rumors, lies, whatever. But with the motive of causing obstacles, stopping them from doing something. And in this particular case, that's already a misdeed in itself, right? Causing that sort of mischief. But in this particular case, highlighted by the Exalted Treatise, you're not just causing mischief for anyone. These are good and kind people. And by that, that good and kind people, what's the definition of being a good and kind person? Well, it means that they're motivated to do something positive and beneficial to others within the community at some level, in some capacity. And you've stopped them from doing that. Or maybe they could have helped 100 people, and because of what you've said or done, obviously no one knows that you've done so, but their capacity to help is now limited to maybe helping 10 people. So a lot of people have missed out on their care, on their help, whatever benefit that they're trying to bring. It could be education, could be medical supplies, whatever it is. And so it means that this is a misdeed that's, more terrible than your average misdeed. So bearing in mind, this is the beginning of the section on misdeeds. And the first few lines are the most terrible misdeeds. You want to start off with those. And the first account relates to a scholar, and this is in the late 17th century. Now, we've talked about civil service examinations before, but for this particular region, the results from the examinations came out. They were announced by public notice, and it was posted on these boards, in public places. And, it would attract a lot of commotion and curiosity. People would gather around to, see who had passed the exams this particular time or this year, who didn't pass, who didn't make the mark. And they would comment on, so-and-so has passed, so-and-so hasn't, etc. And this particular scholar stood out for making the most detailed comments. And he would basically be dishing the dirt on everybody, all of the names. So-and-so has obviously bribed someone. They couldn't possibly have passed. Or so-and-so has, completely no writing ability. I'm not sure how they got, their name on this list of results. Or so-and-so, they haven't really practiced all the things that they've learned, put them into practice. So he would say these disparaging remarks to anyone who would listen, and he would go on and on and on, endlessly. One night, the scholar has a dream, and in his dream, he sees a spirit dressed in golden armor who criticizes in no uncertain terms. The spirit tells him that, look, you've been completely irresponsible with what you've said. So-and-so, all of these people have passed the examinations. So-and-so, they've come from a family where generations of their ancestors have accumulated good deeds and, therefore have the good fortune of their descendant, finally passing the civil service examinations, to be able to look forward to a career as a government official, very prominent status within the community, and being in a position to make a real difference to the general public. So another candidate that passed, they are completely filial to their parents. They look after them, do their very best to love and respect their parents. So they've accumulated all of these quiet misdeeds. Another candidate, they've accumulated quiet misdeeds, quiet deeds that no one knows about, including yourself. And yet you go on and on and on about them. And you make it seem like the spirits who oversee human good deeds and misdeeds, human conduct, are biased or unfair. And that's obviously not the case. So as a result of your misdeeds, your own verbal remarks, you have no hope passing the civil service examinations yourself. And in fact, you don't have much longer to live. As we read earlier in the Exalted Treatise, when a person commits misdeeds, their lifespan gets depleted. It could be anywhere from units of 100 days to 12 years. And by making disparaging remarks, we don't know whether he just did it this particular time when the results were announced, but he had obviously said a lot, enough for him to not have much longer to live, basically. And so this scholar, he wakes up and he comes down with an illness that's to do with his tongue and ultimately dies from that particular illness. You're probably wondering, he just maybe said a lot of things. It wasn't as if he pushed someone into to drown or, completely careless in diagnosing someone, as the stories we've come across. Why is it that he suffers so terribly? It's such a sudden death and a terrible way to go. Well, if you think about it, the people that he criticised, these are all the people who passed the civil service examinations. They would be able to look forward to careers in the government service to serve the general public in positions of leadership. And by making these disparaging comments, it would obviously affect their reputation, for one. And, they might not know about him, but they're going to be in public office. It would affect their reputation. It would affect, the people, whether people could trust that they might be able to do the job. If they heard that so-and-so only passed the examinations because of certain bribes, maybe they would not be able to trust those government officials. And, it would also cause people to lack confidence in the whole government examination selection process of these government officials. And on top of that, to lack confidence in the natural law of cause and effect. So you can see that there are ramifications, and it's extremely serious when you add it all up. You don't know how many people he actually criticised and for how long. And so we can see quite clearly that disparaging others, making negative comments like that, benefits no one. Doesn't benefit the person themselves or the people that they've disparaged. And, at the end of the day, if you really care about someone and you want them to improve, well, you should provide that feedback in private, on a one-to-one basis. So that sort of alerts us to one way of secretly undermining the good and the kind. In the Tang dynasty, there was a man by the name of Baizhen, and he came to be in possession of this medical prescription for carbuncles on the back. And this is a medical condition, it's a skin infection related to the hair follicles. So what he had was this prescription to make the medication that would be very effective to treat these carbuncles or this particular condition. And, he was the only one who had this particular recipe for this remedy, and he would be able to profit, be paid large sums of money for the medication. Now, there was a government official by the name of Gao Shi who wanted to buy that prescription and make it available to people far and wide so that more people could benefit from this wonderful remedy. It was very effective. And so he pays Baitan said tens of gold pieces. So it could be 30, 40, 50, just maybe less than 100 gold pieces, but a significant sum of money. So it wasn't as if he was expecting the man to hand it over for free. And he was clearly motivated. It wasn't for him to treat himself. He wanted to make it available. He was a government official. He had the funds. He had the authority to publicize, make this wonderful prescription more widely available for everyone. But Baitan, he takes the money, takes the gold pieces, but he hands over a fake prescription. It's ineffective. Doesn't work. And Mr. Bai thinks that he can get away with it. When he travels to a place called Jiujiang, he's traveling on the way. People had to travel on foot in those days. There weren't, high-speed trains or anything like that. And the path would be quite dangerous. What happens to him is that he becomes devoured by a hungry tiger along the way. And what is left in his remains is a small purse. And it just so happens that a family relative of Gao Shi picks up the purse, opens it up, and finds a prescription, and it turns out to be the authentic prescription. And so they're able to make it widely available, and it benefits a lot of people. You can imagine, when Baitan was charging high sums of money for this medication, the poor people suffering from this condition had no chance. They couldn't afford to pay that sort of money to be treated. And so here was the person, Baitan, who cheated someone who was clearly motivated to benefit others. And, this is not just, one or two people, but the wider community in general. So that's why his misdeed was all the more serious. And, by choosing to do that, he clearly preferred to more profit to helping more people. And clearly, he didn't understand the natural law of cause and effect. He didn't realize that by sharing this prescription with everyone, he could look forward to a lifetime of good fortunes, helping people feel better. And as a result, he sort of shortchanged himself in the end. He was selflessly clinging to this prescription, ended up being devoured by a tiger, and the prescription was made available in the end anyway. Now, complete contrast, in this other story that comes from the early 13th century, and relates to a scholar by the surname of Feng. This scholar, and in those days, scholars would learn from the morality texts, like the Guidelines for Being a Good Person or the Exalted Treatise, and it's all the other books that they read, but they would be interested in cultivating themselves. And we see that in this particular scholar. He would copy out these time-honoured prescriptions, these old and reliable medical remedies, and he would make sure, try to circulate and make them available far and wide, including posting these prescriptions in public places, try and benefit as many people as possible. Now, one day he's traveling by boat on the South China Sea, and the boat capsizes. And he falls into the waters, and you read about people, their life flashes in front of their eyes. But what happens to this particular scholar is that he sees the water spirit. And the water spirit tells him, your life has been saved because you've helped so many lives from copying out these medical prescriptions. The scholar, he wasn't a doctor himself, but he could read and write, and he used this ability to bring benefit to others. And the water spirit predicts that he will become very wealthy. Now, the scholar sort of hears this and says, how can that be? I've been a poor scholar all of my life. I don't even dare to dream about becoming wealthy. And the water spirit explains to him that, poverty and wealth are destined. You're correct. You can obviously understand the idea of destiny. But if a person has a kind and good heart, they've cultivated good deeds, then their life will obviously be without misfortunes. So they're able to enjoy a good life because they've got a good heart in helping others. And even though, for example, the spirit explains that even though you were destined to die by drowning, your life has been saved. You are, able to be escape from this disaster without any injuries. And because of your kind heart, you've not sustained any injuries, and your kindness deserves to prosper, and therefore you can look forward to enjoying wealth, great wealth, later on. And sure enough, when he wakes up, he finds himself on the beach, unharmed, and this particular scholar does end up becoming very wealthy. So, there are two people. One has this great prescription and clings on to it for his own self benefit, self-interest, and thinks about, just profiting from this particular prescription. Another scholar, he's a learned person, he's well educated, and he's able to use his own skills to bring benefit for others. And as a result, his good fortunes, he's able to change and turn around his life's fortunes. So from, changing a destiny of being drowned to, getting a second chance in one's life, and from being, poor to becoming rich. So anything is possible by cultivating a good and kind heart and ultimately doing good deeds. Okay. Now, obviously the opposite of secretly undermining the good and the kind is to ensure that they are respected. They're given a platform to be able to benefit even more people. And basically the right thing to do is to ensure that they are supported and encouraged to, continue in their good works. And we see this in the examples. There's an early example from the Duke of Zhou. Just share my screen. So this is in relation to falsifying a prescription to cheat others, Baitan, and this is scholar Feng, who copies the prescriptions to save lives in the 13th century. Now this comes from what's known as the Shuo Yuan. It's a collection of historical narratives and anecdotes that were compiled, put together by Liu Xiang, a scholar official from the 1st century before the Common Era, so over 2,000 years ago. And it said that the Duke of Zhou, he served as regent for his young nephew, King Cheng. You can see this was that time during the Zhou dynasty. And basically, he was responsible for setting the foundations for the longest dynastic period in all of China's history. And on top of that, the Duke of Zhou was actually one of the most admired people for Confucius. And it said here that during the 7 years that the Duke served as a regent, he was acting on behalf of the king. He received, or he gave audience or met with 10 men of service dressed in coarse fabric bearing disciples' gifts. So these are men who looked to him as, respected him as their teachers. He would meet with these people. Another 12 people he would treat as his friends. Another 49 from bare dwellings and humble alleyways. These were common people. Why would he, being the Duke, acting on the king's behalf as the regent, be meeting with commoners, 49 of them? And then 100 people. These were special expertise that would be introduced to the court to serve the government, to contribute their special talents. And 1,000 men of servants who had obviously learned from him, and even more people, 10,000 people who sought audience. So basically, he met with anyone who wanted to, offer their advice or opinions, who had special talents. And why did he do that? Well, this was part of showing respect to the good and the kind, what's known as the worthy talent or the worthy officials, and ensuring that, their advice is taken on board to benefit the people. To bring benefit to the people. If they have the capacity to serve the people themselves, to ensure that they are appointed. And, as government officials, they're able to have that authority to bring benefit to the people. So if the Duke of Zhou could do this all this, so long ago, he provided this positive example for generations of officials and rulers ever since. And it's really sort of what you're meant to be doing. And instead of trying to undermine the good and the kind, basically, the least you could do is meet with them, hear what they have to say, and, try to implement, put into practice those good opinions, the good inputs for the benefit of the wider community. And finally, the last example comes from volume 5, and it's to do with this particular chancellor in the state of Song. And this was during the spring and autumn period that Confucius lived in. And he was a chancellor, but he had this attitude that took pleasure in the suffering of others. So he would look at someone experiencing misfortune or pain or suffering, and he would feel happy himself. If he heard about someone achieving any accomplishments, he would feel doubtful. Did they really do that? And he would feel extremely jealous if they did. So this type of mentality, he was able to be the chancellor, but the story records that by his later years, he has 10 sons, and one of them dies in prison, and the others suffer from all forms of medical conditions and infirmities. They're blind, deaf, mute, hunchbacked, all sorts of mental illness. So a very unhappy state, an unhealthy state for all of his family members. And he has a good friend by the name of Gongming Zigao, who visits him and sees the state of his family members and really gets him to reflect on himself. Scholars in those days, including government officials, they would be aware that, the sorts of misfortunes were no accidents. And this was good cause to reflect on what he maybe thought about or said or done. And he said, look, this might not be the end. It could get worse. And so he sort of reminded his friend to reflect. And he shared with his friend a particular book. And it's a book that we sort of mentioned, I think it was last week. It's the book called 智松子中经, a book of balanced cautions. 中戒经, sorry. And it's a classic, it's a morality text, sort of setting out what's the right thing to do, what's the wrong thing to do. And we looked at the section on penalties, where, one good deed, one misdeed, 10 misdeeds, all the way to 1,000 misdeeds and the consequences for the individual. And his finds that the next time he visits his friend, all of the sons, the remaining sons, they've recovered from the various conditions. And he asks his friend, have you found a good doctor to treat your sons? And his friend tells him that, no, actually, all I've done is I've read the book that you shared with me and I've put it into practice. All of my sons tried to obviously change my attitudes and cultivated good deeds, and all of my sons have gotten better. And so Gao is really amazed by the great results. And he sort of says, well, heaven has blessed you for all of your kind deeds. If you keep this up for the rest of your life, things are bound to get even better. And it just sort of shows that things can change if we try to improve and make the right decisions. And the time that I have left, I'll just quickly cover surreptitiously humiliate leaders and parents. Again, surreptitiously, as you can see, sort of corresponds with secretly. Again, this is a person who thinks they can get away with humiliating their leaders. It could be a state leader. It could be their, head of the organization that they're working for or serving within the community. And they're doing things against their leaders and parents that no one knows about it. No one hears, no one sees. So it's easy to think that they're able to get away with it. Now, what's wrong with doing so? Well, if I start with the parents, because parents are obviously the first relationship that we have in our life, being humiliating in this particular way includes being insincere, so not really meaning what you say, being inconsiderate, and actively deceiving your parents. And what's wrong about doing so is that if you think about it, our parents, from the moment that we're conceived, they've given us so much, a life, a lot of things that we have. We're able to grow up, have an education. They nourish us, not just with food, but ensure that we grow up and go to school and able to develop as a good, ethical human being. And, beyond the 3 meals a day, having a roof over our head, all the things that they do for us. They think about us, they care about us. As a parent, it's not a job. It's 24/7, 365 days a week. In fact, from the moment that you have a child to the moment that you die, you're always a parent, always, conscious and mindful about how your child is doing, whether that your child loves you back or not. And so by humiliating your parents in secret or going against their will, that is no way to repay their kindness. And so that makes it all the more serious as a misdeed. And I'll just make one more point. I don't think we'll be able to finish this. But yes, parents, certainly they have expectations, they might set down some house rules, but if you think about it, those expectations, those rules, most of the time, they're there to motivate us to, study well, put in the hard yards, to develop our skills and our abilities, so that, and ultimately also a character as well, our good ethical character, so that we can become independent. Because at the end of the day, our parents aren't getting any younger as well, so they can't be providing for us their whole life. And that's why they may be more strict with us. And even parents who are the hands-off types, they're a bit more liberal, they might not care as much about, the minutiae of what we do and what we not do. But that doesn't mean that their son or daughter can just do what they like. It's still a misdeed to go against the will of your parents and, to be surreptitiously humiliating them. And I'm conscious of the time, so I'll sort of end on this note, and we'll come back to this particular passage next week. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you very much indeed.